Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of WCM Fireside Chats. My name is Brian Searl, coming to you from a weird, undisclosed location somewhere in an Airbnb. Ben, before we get started, introduce everybody. I just want to say, do you remember when you were a kid and you used to play sports and you used to have like a bad game and you would have to wait till next week with the team to improve your score, and so you were thinking about it all week? Did you do that? Did you play sports?
Yeah.
So that's what I feel like. Like we had to do that show without Cara last week, and I've just been waiting 7 days, and now Cara's back. So I feel like we're whole again. It's going to be a good show again. So.
Yeah. Well, I do need to apologize. I had kind of a family emergency come up last week and disappeared a little bit. So a big apologies to both my co-hosts. I'm sure none of the audience cares.
I didn't even know you were gone until halfway through the show. I was like, where's Cara?
Oh,
Yeah.
come on. That's not nice.
I knew I wasn't going to be that good. It's just, yeah.
So,
It was a great show. You guys did a great job.
yeah.
No, well, Ben might have done a good job.
Oh.
I need you to carry me. I'm just pulling myself. So, okay. So we have a awesome show here on the National Park Service. Got some really good guests for you. Ben, you want to let everybody introduce themselves?
Yeah. Why don't we, that way we don't screw up titles. We can start with Kurt. So Kurt, just kind of tell us a little bit about what you do.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the editor and founder in National Parks Traveler, a nonprofit media organization that covers national parks and protected areas largely across the world, but predominantly here in North America.
Yeah. And for the audience who doesn't know, nationalparkstraveler.org, and it's a really good website. I know I've tuned a couple people on in our industry to it just to keep up on some of the stuff that's national park related, and you guys are expanding into Canada with some Parks Canada coverage here the last few months, so that's great. So
Yeah, no, we're really excited about it, and it's bringing in a whole new audience, both to the U.S. national parks as well as to the Canadian parks.
yeah. So Al, I guess just explain a little bit about what you do. I'm sure a lot of our audience is familiar with you. So
I'm with the Recreational Adventures Company, and we are KOA's largest franchisee. We've got 15 KOAs spread across the country, and 3 or 4 of those serve National Park Service markets. So we're outside the boundaries of the parks, taking care of the same folks that go see them. And we also have one National Park Service concession in Virginia where we operate a campground within a national park.
okay.
So this is a topic of great interest.
Yeah, definitely. And then it's Tamara, right? Or Tamara?
It's Tamara. Hi, everybody. I'm Tamara Delaplane. I'm with the National Park Service. I am a project manager in an office called the Denver Service Center, which is a service office for all of the parks across the system.
Okay.
Don't be upset because Cara's
Yeah.
been on the show for a year almost, and he still doesn't know her last name.
Yeah.
We just skipped Kara's last name.
Yeah, I was going to say, mine is an extreme case. Nobody can pronounce my name. Even my son is 11 years old. He can barely pronounce his last name. It's fine.
So for people who've watched the show regularly, Cara from the Canadian Camping and RV Council is one of our co-hosts, and Brian, founder and owner of Insider Perks, which is a marketing firm focused on the outdoor hospitality industry in Cleveland, Ohio. He's on a little bit of a trip this week, so he's broadcasting from a different location. So, and he's being real secretive about it. He doesn't want us to know where he's at. So,
I'll tell you why at the end of the show. I'll tell you why I'm doing it.
But
I don't want Tamara to think that we're anything but utmost professional on the show. So we'll have our fun at the end.
Okay.
I think this is our 3rd and 4th week using this new software, which enables us to broadcast on a number of Facebook pages, and it actually brings in the comments from those Facebook pages so that we can see them live. I see Sally on YouTube commented and it popped up, so that's great. So if you guys have any questions or comments or anything, feel free to share those with us during the show, and we can mention them and bring them on screen. And Lesneed on Facebook said it's hard to hear you, Brian.
hard to hear. I'm sorry. Like, I'm on the road. I tried. I'm putting my best effort here. So
I guess we just have to accept it.
it'll probably be a better show without me talking as much anyway. So
So I was really excited about this show because we wanted to focus on the National Park Service and just the work that they've been doing, and to try to to improve their parks and to improve the camping experience and some of the maybe challenges they faced. And we all heard about the Great American Outdoors Act last year, which is the purpose is to help fund the National Park Service and some of the projects that they need done. So I guess, I just wanted to kind of start with, what, we've been reading stories about national park campgrounds adding new services and sites and everything. I guess, just kind of what's the focus of the National Park Service moving into 2021, I guess, as far as that goes, Tamara.
So let me give you a little overview about what I've been managing for the last couple of years. Well, since fall 2019, we've been in the Park Service. We've been working on the second century campground strategy, and Kurt has written a couple articles about that. Thanks for that, Kurt. And that strategy has three different parts. One being looking at kind of our data service-wide and across public lands. So not just the Park Service, but BLM, Forest Service, etc. And the second part of the strategy is working with some contractors to develop some market analysis tools that will help the Park Service, help individual parks when they want to consider what kinds of upgrades they should make, what the market wants, and look at that from a business case scenario. And then the third part of the strategy is developing a National Park Service campground design guide to assist Park Service employees in different parks in when they are upgrading parks, like just making things kind of consistent for users and for the visitors. So we've been working on that strategy, and things are going really well. The market analysis tools will be available for parks to use in May or June of this year, and the campground design guide will be available by the end of April. That design guide was out for public review for 2 months at the end of 2020. So some of you might have seen it.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know what's making all that noise in the background, but so that's all pretty exciting. I guess on the development front, what are you guys, is the National Park Service, you guys are pretty active in improving the parks right now, correct? As far as adding sites or adding accommodations and things?
So it does vary park by park. There's not a push to kind of force any one park to do, any particular thing, but we are seeing that there's, obviously an increase in RV owners and desire for users to be able to pull their RVs and camp in parks. But we also don't want to be in competition with the private sector. So that's where those market analysis tools come into effect so that a park can really look at their particular scenario, what options are available kind of just outside the park boundary, and what might be needed within the park rather than areas where we could partner with someone like Mr. Johnson.
Yeah.
That's
yeah. I mean, I guess, Al, you operate a couple, you have the concessionary contract, and then you operate a couple of parks near the national parks, I guess, which are still, they're huge draws for campers. I guess, how do you work with the National Park Service, I guess, or, how does that relationship work out for you with the private parks and everything? Sorry, I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, we participate with the National Park Service. We provided input on their guides that they're developing right now. We want to make sure that people that choose to stay in the national park campgrounds have a good experience. The national parks are, well, first of all, they're the leaders. Historically, I mean, they started this thing, and they started people traveling to get to national parks. And the private campgrounds developed both for the travelers that are on their way to the parks and for people that wanted amenities or services, or there weren't enough sites available in the parks. There wouldn't be a robust private campground industry the way it is if it wasn't for the National Park Service and what they've developed. So we want people to have a good experience there. Tamara's right that they have to approach development very carefully now that people have invested their private money to develop campgrounds outside the parks, to not impact their business negatively, but to find a way to make modernizing the national park campgrounds a win for everybody. One of the things that I feel is important to consider are the tenters. Tenting is the gateway to outdoor recreation, to camping in all kinds of campgrounds. They graduate from that to maybe a pop-up to an RV. But everybody's ideal is a great tent site in a national park. And that draws a lot of people into the industry. So I want to make sure that not all the campsites in national parks get converted to RV-friendly sites, because in many cases that doesn't satisfy the tenter. And frankly, national park campgrounds do a better job of accommodating tenters in many cases than private campgrounds do, just in terms of the ambience of the site. So that was an important consideration, I think, for bringing out to the National Park Service as they engage in this. The private campground industry is adding 50,000 sites this year. So it'd be kind of strange to say that the National Park Service shouldn't participate in the growth of the industry. It just needs to be approached sensitively.
Yeah.
You know, Ben, I think that both Al and is definitely right about what he's saying about, keeping space for the tenters out there. And Tamara, I think the Park Service has a huge challenge facing it. You mentioned marketing and what do the people want out there. I know a lot of the readers of the National Parks Traveler are concerned that the campgrounds are going to be enlarged largely for the RV audience, and they're going to be stuck in their tents or their small pop-ups next to an RV that's got its generator going from 6 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night, which really takes away from the national park experience. As Al said, the private RV campgrounds outside national parks and gateway towns are better suited, I think, for handling the bigger RVs. I know I had Yellowstone National Park Superintendent Cam Shawley on our podcast this past Sunday, and the week before, actually, it was a two-part show. But he was saying that he doesn't foresee creating any new campgrounds in Yellowstone or enlarging campgrounds. He might make some more hookups available. But I think that the real challenge is providing for both those who RV into the parks as well as for the tenters, in providing each a wonderful experience, which is the challenge the Park Service has to figure out.
Yeah. Glamping comes into this too, as I guess when you were looking at the design, when you were creating this guide, did glamping play into what you guys created for the National Park Service as far as like yurts and unique accommodations and things like that?
So in our market analysis contract, we asked the two contractors that we hired to look at the trends in the industry, and they created two market analysis reports that included that concept of glamping or camper cabins, or things beyond somebody bringing their own tent or their own RV or their own equipment, maybe even renting equipment in some cases. And so they addressed those concepts in the market analysis reports as potential for use in national park campgrounds. But again, it's really going to be up to each individual park and the market that it supplies. I want to go back to Kurt's point and Al's point on the tenters. In that market analysis trends report, actually the two reports, one from each contractor, both contractors did find that still the majority of users are tent users. It's kind of 1 out of 4 people have an RV, but 3 out of 4 people are tent campers. And that's based on research that they pulled from people like KOA and it's the industry now. Those reports are available to the public on the National Park System Advisory Board website if you guys wanted to take a look at those. And then in our campground design guide that Al mentioned he was able to provide input on, comments on, we do talk about the need to separate the users so that you don't have those tent campers right next to RV users, because they do want kind of a different aesthetic and a different feel to their camping site. So in the guide, we recommend that if there are upgrades to an existing campground, to say make 1 out of 3 loops available for RV users, that you still separate out those tent campers so they don't get impacted by RV users, RV lights and generators, and that they have their own separate experience. It's maybe a little closer to nature and more what they're looking for. Because in the Park Service, we do have to balance those different user groups and allow for activities that meet all the different populations' needs.
Yeah.
It's incredibly important, I think, to keep that top of mind. Specific to this issue tenting is such a kind of a gateway entry into this market. I'd be interested, do your market reports go into any data specific to that conversion? Do you guys do any data collection about that, from tenting up to maybe a pop-up or an RV from there, or are you just looking at existing numbers?
So in the trends reports, they did look at projections and changes and growth projections in the market. I don't think they really looked at exactly what you're talking about, Cara, as far as like what kind of is the tipping point for people to shift from tenting to RV use. I don't really think that was addressed. But yeah, it is an interesting question.
You know, you mentioned glamping and whatnot, and Cara, Parks Canada has really been kind of creative in some of the lodging or the accommodations they're providing in national parks for people who have never camped before, or to wet their feet, so to speak. We had a story last week, I think it was, on one of the parks and the different types of accommodations people can rent.
I saw it.
Yeah. And we're seeing they do some unique, really cool programming with a Learn to Camp program. I do believe this is pre-COVID, but they used to specifically provide Learn to Camp programs, oftentimes in a glamping unit, to kind of newer segments of the market, new demographics that maybe aren't typically seen as campers. So urbanites, new immigrants, things like that. They were specifically providing that programming. So they would set it up so you could go out and set up a tent and learn how to build a fire and all of those things, which I really commend Parks Canada for doing some unique stuff there. I also think maybe this is a bit weather dependent, but we do have a scenario where our parks are a bit less accessible for a good portion of the year, and so those glamping options really extend this seasonality and the ability to get into those parks. Just from a safety kind of warmth shelter standpoint, for sure.
You guys don't get snow up in Canada. That doesn't happen. No snow up there. But I think some states down here have similar programs. I know, like New York, I believe a few years ago, at least, had started a get camping program where they gave people like kits or whatever and taught them how to camp, or taught them some of the basics. I don't know. Does the National Park Service have anything like that? Does anybody know of anything like that?
Yeah, they do. I mean, Grand Teton has canvas tents that are concession run. Alaska parks have lots of cabins for rent, especially in the backcountry. So there's a variety of options across the system. Flamingo has kind of elevated tents that looks like one of the Facebook users just put a link to in the chat. So there's a lot of different options out there in the system. We've got 423 park units, and I think last I looked, it was maybe around 130 of those have camping available in some sense.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I mean, yeah, that's awesome. I think one of the things we hear too now is that, I know on the private park sector, we're hearing just about the overwhelming number of people, and some people are, lack of sites, kind of stuff like that. I guess I would imagine on the national park side, you guys had an excellent year in a lot of different areas last year. I guess, what do you do about the overwhelming number of new RVers and campers wanting to come? What's the future look like there as far as being able to get more people camping in the parks, I guess?
Well, I mean, I think it's all about letting the users know the availability. And part of our kind of that first tier of the overall campground strategy is looking at how we share data across the Park Service with ourselves and also with the visitors, and bumping up the number of opportunities in National Park Service campgrounds for reserving campsites ahead of time and looking at the inventory that's available ahead of time. And that really helps a lot of users, not all. Some users like to be more kind of last minute. So we need to try and accommodate both of those. But part of the strategy over the last year and a half, we did increase the number of National Park Service campsites that were available for advanced reservation on recreation.gov. I'm looking at my data here. We added 1,800 new campsites. So the campsites were existing, but they weren't previously available for advanced reservation on recreation.gov. We found that was really a good communication tool, especially during this past summer with COVID restrictions, really helping people kind of target where and when they could get out safely.
Yeah, I think Derek mentioned on the comments, he mentions, that overnight stays in national parks are down over the past 30 years, including RV overnights. I don't quite know where those numbers come from, but that's what he mentioned. And I know,
let's give it a chance, right? Is that actually accurate, Tamara, or no? I mean,
is which part accurate?
He mentioned a comment that just said national park RV nights are down for the last
30%.
30 years. I feel like national parks are packed. I'm not sure that that's accurate, but
that comes from Park Service numbers. I mean, I've tracked them, and Derek and I have talked about them quite a bit.
Yeah,
go ahead, Karen.
I was just going to say, I think, we're seeing interesting numbers specific to day use and things like that. But I think, potentially the overnight stuff is down considering the growth of the private sector. And I think the national or the federal parks in Canada's instance are doing a better job of really facilitating great partnerships with private operators that are near their locations. And so I think that's impacting those things too. And I think there's some appetite from some parts of the market who want to see more careful use of those lands. And so, that a few less nights over the last 30 years is advantageous in the eyes of some individuals for sure.
Well, so this is something we should explore, right? Because I feel like there's a nice balance here between national parks and private parks, and we can all get along and play well together for the benefit of the whole outdoor industry, right? So I know that there are some people who, like clients that we have, that view it as competition. I don't. But I think that is there any data, Tamara, about like the overflow that comes from national parks or the interest that people come to an area and then overflow and kind of increase the private park business area as a result of that? Or
so I don't have at my fingertips analytical data across the system, but I can give anecdotal data from individual parks, from conversations that I've had. And I know parks like Grand Teton are showing that because the campsites in the park itself are full, that the public lands and the private campgrounds outside the park boundaries are seeing that overflow, and that they are starting at that park to work with the other public lands agencies to kind of manage that better, and as opposed to people kind of showing up, not getting a campground or campsite in the campground in the park, and then kind of ditching off into the U.S. Forest Service outside. From what I hear, that particular park, the private campgrounds are always booked as well as the public campgrounds within the park itself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what I'd be curious about seeing, you know, Derek mentioned the decline in overnight stays in national parks. What's it looking like on other public lands? Are people getting fed up, to use a phrase, with the congestion in a national park and opting to go to a Forest Service campground perhaps, or a BLM campground? I mean, the Park Service doesn't have a monopoly on beauty of the outdoors.
Well, that's true, and so this balance is interesting though, and so let's give Al a chance to comment here. Al, how do you see that? How does that balance play out at the RAC parks that are near national parks?
I hate to think that, excuse me, that our parks would be overflow parks. That's not a very good, strong business proposition.
No. Just one example.
But the park needs to be desirable too.
Yes.
And in relation to the national park or the national forest campgrounds, I think probably more of those have been closed down because of budget restrictions than national park campgrounds. I think they tend to, if they have a rundown campground and can't afford to fix it up, they put a gate on it. I don't know that the National Park Service does that nearly as much, but I think that the Great American Act is going to really help maintain what's there, if not expand. And I think that at first I thought that it might be easier for the government agencies to improve and expand their campgrounds than it is for the private parks to do it because of regulatory issues. But the more I think about it, they're probably more challenged by regulatory issues, NEPA and things like that, that most private parks don't have to deal with. We have to deal with local planning boards and things like that. But it's just a challenge for everybody in this industry to be nimble enough to react to the new campers that are entering the market now.
Yeah. It's just on overflow. What I meant to kind of tie that in together with is that there's a lot of people who think that national parks compete with private parks and take away some of their camper nights, but on the flip side, they're kind of giving some back too by drawing more interest into an area and having that overflow available to you. So I think it kind of balances out is what my goal is there, to say that.
Yeah, well, I think that's true. I think that the private sector has proven to be more nimble in providing what guests want. But that's not really a fair statement because the National Park Service has done too much in the last 50, 60 years after they started these beautiful campgrounds. They haven't changed a whole lot. Some of them have, but in general, it's been up to the private campground operators to determine what people want to provide that. If the National Park Service moved to provide everything that private campgrounds provide, it would be a competitive challenge. If the National Park Service wanted to put in swimming pools and water slides and things like that, I don't see that happening. I'm just saying it depends on what the developments are and how they come into it.
Yeah.
Derek here is saying in Rocky Mountain National Park at Estes Park entrance, there were 5 campgrounds 20 years ago, and now there are 3. Do you think that has to do with what I was saying about the park still needs to be desirable? Do you think out of those 5, only those 3 were nimble enough to offer the desirability that kept them open? Or is that a lack of traffic and lack of business through the doors that closed those other 2?
I'm sorry, I can't speak to why those campgrounds.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
total speculation for sure.
I honestly didn't even know that fact. So
It's interesting to me. That's
yeah.
So-
You know, back in 2014, I had a conversation with John Jarvis, who at the time was the director of the National Park Service. And he'd said that he was concerned that national parks were losing their relevancy with the American public. And I haven't had a chance before today's talk to look at the numbers to see if there was a downswing. And maybe there was coming out of the 20th century that led to those park campgrounds being closed. But then we saw the centennial of the Park Service in 2016, and the numbers have just been off the charts since then.
Well, and I can share that across the system this past summer, just like the private sector, we saw massive increases in campground use. You know, as I know the private sector did as well.
yeah.
Well, I think there's always going to be two different types of campers, right? Yes, there's going to be some shared people who could go to either a national park campground or a private, but there are always going to be people who want to be in nature as opposed to next to it or near it, with the obvious exception that Al's got the one park inside, right? But for the most part, and there's going to be people who prefer to have more rustic experiences than having all the water slides and things like that. And so I think that especially with the growing popularity of the outdoors, there's always going to be people to fill these sites. We just have to figure out what the balance is, and I think that it's in the best interest of both people to try to figure that out. But let's talk briefly about this Great American Outdoors Act. What is this going to change for the National Park Service, Tam?
So the Great American Outdoors Act focus is really on reducing deferred maintenance. It's written right in the act, and it's what Congress is going to be holding us to. So the Program Management Office will be working with the Bureau's Investment Review Board to really hone in on strategic criteria for selecting projects. The fiscal year 21 project selection list is available through the Department of Interior. We have not finalized the fiscal year 22 list, but we're working on that next. So it's really a matter of looking across the system at all of the areas where we have the most deferred maintenance that we can impact positively. So some campgrounds will be involved, but it's not a campground-centric fund source. So there's going to be a range of projects that are addressed with the Act.
And I think something that needs to be kept in mind is it's not a panacea for the Park Service's needs. There are just too many needs out there that have been the result of, frankly, lack of federal funding that the parks need to maintain. I mean, over the years, we've seen a growth in national park additions. I mean, when I started as a traveler, I think there was 390. And today, there's 423, Tamara?
423.
And
Wow.
a lot of those join the system with their own maintenance backlog. And so while the Great American Outdoors Act will solve some problems, it's not going to come close to solving all the problems. In fact, you can look at it, was it $1.5 billion a year it goes to the Park Service, Tam? And I think you can have 3 parks could gobble up all that money.
Sure. Yeah.
But it's still a very, very positive development to have that available and to have
You got to start somewhere.
the focus that's there, whether it's 100% focus or not, Kurt. What focus there is on camping in the national parks is a very, very positive development. It'll be very helpful. The people that choose to stay there need to also have good roads and good other facilities to make their stay enjoyable too. So it all really works together to get people outdoors. I think it's just very positive.
My point, though, is that we can't rest on our laurels and say we passed the Great American Outdoors Act and everything's going to be great in the national parks.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think the majority of people are, but at the same time, correct me if I'm wrong, this was passed before COVID, right? Earlier.
It was
It
passed.
was
It was during COVID last summer.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think that now that we've seen this extraordinary interest in the outdoors that's resulted from this, if there's one positive maybe we can take from this experience, is that there's more attention on the National Park Service. And so maybe that helps us take step 2 and step 3 for going forward.
And this act does give like funding for the future, continual funding for the future, correct?
So
5 years.
the Act itself has two different fund sources associated
Okay.
with it. The Legacy Restoration Fund, which is what's applied to deferred maintenance, and is that $1.9 billion per year for 5 years. That is only 5 years. The other fund source that was identified in the Act is the LWCF funding, and that fund source is in perpetuity.
So what does the, I'm newer. I get, I haven't read the entire bill. It's quite long. I guess, what does the LCWF funds, I guess, what can you guys use that for on an annual basis?
So I'm not an expert on that fund source. I bet Kurt
Okay.
probably knows more about this than me, but I will share that it is the Land and Water Conservation Fund. So it can be used, a couple things it can be used for are partnership projects. It can be applied to state parks and Forest Service. I'm sorry, not Forest Service, that would be a different bureau, but state parks or kind of local parks in partnership with National Park Service, as well as acquiring additional lands.
Okay.
Maybe lands that might be in a park or contingent to a park.
Okay. All right.
And you mentioned state parks. There's a comment here that we got from Margaret Bailey too. We understand this is an NPS focused call, but when you talk about campgrounds in the public sector, we cannot ignore the state parks, Forest Service, as well as BLM. I know when I spent 3 years on the road at the very beginning of this company, like building it, and we would stay in all kinds of different state parks. We would do videos on the Tennessee State Park System, on Florida State Park System, and Kentucky has like a really, really nice state park system. I know Florida's got some amazing houses that you can rent.
Yeah.
This was 10 years ago. I'm sure obviously some of it's changed, but so yeah, it's something that we can't ignore. But I think that those state parks kind of function in the same way this discussion has been going, right? They help draw interest to an area that may not otherwise have it, and so I think that there's a balance there for both private and public. Is that correct? Or?
Absolutely. I completely agree. I was hoping to get somebody from a couple of our provincial parks bodies up here to join us today. I imagine the kind of basic framework stuff is comparable to how the state parks and NPS are related down there, but here up here in Canada, for sure, our provincial parks, at least in our provincial parks, at least here in Alberta, are very numerous, and so they typically, they have a ton of traffic. They see, every season in the spring when they open their online reservation system, the website gets crashed because so many people are scrambling to book their sites for the summer as soon as they possibly can have the chance. So it's absolutely a huge factor specifically to the camping industry here in Alberta, and I'm certainly think that's the same in each of the provinces. The provincial parks are really, really gorgeous and definitely bring tons of new market access to the industry for sure.
And I think we were going to talk a little bit about the state parks down the road, because I think on our calendar we're going to talk about privatizing state parks. I think that was on our schedule for I think it's sometime in March or something, or maybe in April. We were just going to talk a little bit about some state park systems that are looking at maybe privatizing. I think Mississippi or Louisiana was one of them that I had read about. So we are going to touch a little bit on some of the state park systems down the road too, which are huge for parks and states and stuff too. So
Al, I have a question for you. So obviously RAC owns we've talked about a multitude of different KOA properties, some in national parks, some not. We talked about, obviously nobody wants to be that overflow. So you've built up, you've listened to guest needs, you've added amenities, you've changed things like that. So how do you feel like that plays with your marketing, right? And so to take your parks, like, do you own one by Mount Rushmore? Am I correct there?
That's our main one, is by Mount Rushmore, which is a national park that has no campground, and therefore a great opportunity for us. But we also have one right next to Harpers Ferry National Park, which we share a boundary with, and they also do not have a campground. So we have a park in Cody, Wyoming, which serves the Yellowstone market, but from a distance away. So yeah, we're impacted by the national parks. By the way, we advertise them like crazy because that's a magnet, right? So,
Of course.
Well, so
Yeah.
that's where I was gonna actually take this, is the advertising and the marketing question, right? Because that's what I do for a living. And so we've got some clients who are near Yosemite, we've got some clients who are near the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, quite a number of other ones, right? And so how does that influence what you do as far as marketing and advertising? Obviously, people are coming to the area to see the national park, but are you 50-50 with promoting the national park and promoting things like your water slides and premium sites and things like that, or how does that balance out at RAC?
oh, I think, most advertising is split. It talks about what there is to do in the area and why you should come to that area. And it also talks about the amenities that are available on the campground. Repeat customers aren't as actively going to the national parks. When they come back, they might just come to spend a weekend on the park and use our amenities. It depends. In Cody, that's kind of a pass-through place, so that wouldn't necessarily be true. But the national parks, even for campgrounds that are on the highway in the middle of Iowa, the national parks are very important because it's drawing people from Chicago to go to Yellowstone. So we don't advertise Yellowstone in Des Moines, Iowa, but it's an important part of the reason that people are traveling and stopping there.
You bet.
We do marketing for a park in Du Bois. I think it's Du Bois, Wyoming, which is on the way to
Du Bois.
actually, right? Yeah.
Du Bois.
Du Bois. Mm-hmm.
Du Bois. So sorry for the client who I just mispronounced your city on. But anyway, so yeah,
it's a great town.
That's the thing, right? Like it's a stopover, and that town basically, it doesn't exist only for that. A lot of people stop there as an overnight on the way to split up that journey, and so it's important to those people too. You're right. I think that's where you're going with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think Andrea commented when we were talking about some of the American Outdoors Act stuff. Andrea Lindy Hop. I don't know if that's how you pronounce her last name. I'm just horrible with last names and I guess first names now. So Andrea Lindy Hop. I think the key is using the new tools to be strategic, not just fixing up what's already there, thinking about the future, changes in trends, changes in people using the facilities, all of the nearby options like Forest Service, BML, private, and more. Remember, NPS numbers are higher than any other parks worldwide. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but I don't know if that's true or not. So, but just the fact, I think that's what a lot of this, like the guide that they're coming out with and the focus of the American Outdoors Act is looking towards the future and changes and trends and things, which is really exciting to see. Because I know on the private park side, we KOA's been great coming out with the study the last 5 or 6 years, and it's really opened everyone's eyes to new trends and new areas of focus that the private park sector needs to focus on. So it's great to see the NPS focusing on looking towards the future and not just focusing on what's there. So
I want to commend Tamara for her work too, because from the start of this conversation, you really mentioned, looking at these often on a really case-by-case basis, because, location and nearby amenities and so many factors go into, strategically planning these things. And I think it's great to see that the NPS, has a team who's obviously, very cognizant of that and is using those tools to be strategic about, development and changes into the future and how the market's going to look. I appreciate it so much.
Thanks, Cara. Well, I know we also looked towards Parks Canada and some of the work that you guys have already done on design guides and things as we started out our guide development as well. So
cool.
I think one of the areas that NPS is kind of leading in a little bit too is the ADA side. I know on the private park side, we've been talking a lot about the Americans with Disabilities Act and how it impacts private parks, but I know the NPS has already been doing a ton of work on that. I think you guys have quite a few ADA sites and campgrounds and things like that. So that's been great to see.
Thank you. We are looking to continue improving that and being able to welcome as many people with as many different abilities as possible to the campgrounds.
So great.
Yeah, I know on the private park side, that's something that we've been talking a lot about, coming up with parks owners coming up with plans for how they're going to implement the ADA stuff into their parks. And then, obviously on the website side, which is completely different, that's been a huge topic too on the website side. So I don't know how that stuff goes up in Canada as far as, that kind of stuff. So.
The environment is very similar. I think accessibility is certainly a priority. And we're seeing older campgrounds make lots of changes and new developments do some really cool, unique things to, increase accessibility across a broad range of ability levels for sure. And I see that just continuing perpetually.
Yeah.
Part of it is that the rules have been written for ADA for federal properties, but not yet for private ones. It's in development. But the NFPA 1194, the standards for private campgrounds, independent but in concert with the ADA regulations, have included campground accessibility standards in the latest version of NFPA 1194. So those standards are there. They're not official, adopted by the government yet, but that was taking too long. So we got energetic and got it done ahead of that.
Well,
the other thing we need to lift out that the National Park Service is leading on, though, is recognizing the different camping styles of different ethnic groups and trying to incorporate that where in the markets that it makes sense to do that. So that's kind of interesting development as well.
It's so great. I was going to say, Al, we are actively kind of sharing the NFPA 1194 guideline stuff with our park members here in Canada as well. Similarly, we don't have any sort of regulatory governing body specific to campgrounds, but new developments are embracing those standards on this side of the border as well.
That's great, because our customers use both sides of the border, so the standards ought to be coordinated.
Yes. So. Absolutely.
Yeah, and for people who don't, viewers who don't know, the NFPA 1194 is a standard that the National Association of RV Parks and Campgrounds it works with, and that they utilize to kind of help build and campgrounds to certain plans, and it contains rules and stuff, guidelines on different ways to build out campgrounds and things like that. So that can be used to present to like local officials and stuff when designing campgrounds and sites and things. I don't know if I explained that very well, but I think that's a general take of what NFPA 1194 is.
NFPA stands for National Fire Protection Association. So it's independent of campgrounds. There's a few campground people on the panel, but it's considered with life safety issues and design issues and things like that.
Yeah, so it's a really good standard. I just, with the Great American Outdoors Act, I think maybe we touched on this earlier. It's just amazing the amount of people that have been going outdoors during the COVID crisis. It seemed to really spur that on, and it just looks like this year is just going to be another huge year for both national parks and private parks. And so it's great to see all of that, because I really think, the American Outdoors Act is great, but it would be great to see more of that stuff come along through the, more funding and stuff come along down the road, and hopefully this kind of spurs that on a little bit more as more people hit the road and want to go camping and check out national parks. So.
And Tamara, did you say there's a list online of what parks are for 2021 going to get the maintenance? Or?
Yeah, there was an official press release through the Department of Interior that has a list of the projects in all of the bureaus, but including the National Park Service for fiscal year 21, which, as you probably know, our fiscal year starts in October. So October was our the beginning of our fiscal year 2021. So we're in second quarter now, nearly third quarter of the fiscal year. But yeah, that's through the Department of Interior, and I could email that to Ben after the call if you wanted to share that out.
Yeah, and we actually ran a story on the funding details for the Great American Outdoors Act. So I think we ran that press release. I'll have to find it. I could put it in the comments of our Facebook page when we're done here. So
if listeners go to nationalparkstraveler.org and just search for Great American Outdoors Act, it's the first hit. I just search for it and comes right up, the DOI list.
yeah, and I can put a link to your website on our Facebook page too. National Parks Traveler is a really good resource for staying up to date on everything that's going on, and they do you guys do like a podcast audio thing every week, and not just like news either. You guys are diving into like the history of the parks and different things, so that's really great. So
is there I obviously don't want to go into the whole list, right? But is there something that either Kurt or Tamara sticks out in your mind as some of the bigger national parks that are going to be benefiting in 2021 from some of this maintenance?
Well, since we're talking about campgrounds, I can share that there are a couple projects with campgrounds on the list. Yosemite has 2 campgrounds that are getting funding through the Legacy Restoration Fund, Tuolumne Meadows and sorry, I'm kind of spacing the other name, but it's
Bridal Veil Creek Campground.
Yes, thank you, Kurt. Bridal Veil Creek. And let's see, Mount Rainier has a campground project on the fiscal year 21 list as well.
Nice.
So there's Sequoia and Kings Canyon. The Lodgepole Campground water system is going to be rehabbed. There's a bunch of them out there.
That's so great.
Well, that's good. I mean, we don't want to go to the whole list. I just wanted to know if there's a couple that touched on. You mentioned Yosemite too. Like this is, and just circling back real briefly to this, because it's something that we consistently hear, at least I hear, is that there's that fear of competition from some of the private park owners, and we can actually see this. Like I was spending the weekend working on a client we have who's a private park right outside of Yosemite. We can see this in the data of what people search for, that people are clearly looking for campground in Yosemite or campground near Yosemite. And there's two different clear audiences of what people are looking for. And so I think that just balances out well. And I just wanted to bring that up again it's people know what they want. And there's plenty of people to go around to make everybody happy, I think, especially with what we've had in 2020 and leading into 2021 now.
And I wonder too, if sometimes like travelers just assume, like when it comes to Yosemite or maybe like a Yellowstone, that maybe they assume that the campgrounds are going to be pretty full, because I imagine the national park campgrounds stay pretty full during the summer months. So maybe they just obviously maybe they just decide they would rather look for another campground or stuff like that around there. So
well, there's positives and negatives to both experiences, right? I mean, obviously you want to be as close to nature as possible, but maybe you don't want to deal with all those crowds, and so maybe you want to stay near Yosemite, or maybe you're not just visiting the national park, maybe you're visiting other things in the area, and so it's more convenient for you to stay outside of the park. But it's very clear, like at least in the data that we're seeing, that people are already looking for the experience that they want. And so case by case, just using our example, right? I don't want to show ads when somebody's for my product.
Whoops.
Oh, we've lost you. Oh,
you lost me?
Oh,
yeah,
we
lost you briefly.
Oh, sorry. So I don't know. Anyway, so but my point is people are very clearly looking for an experience. And so we don't want to show ads, for example, for our private park when somebody's looking for campgrounds in Yosemite, because we already know what they're looking for. And so we would step back in that case and let people find what they're looking for. And there's plenty of traffic to fill our park for the people looking for near, for around, for things like that. Just great to be able to coexist in that way and just kind of see that data. It's kind of fascinating.
Yeah.
One thing, Tamara, I'm curious if last year, Yellowstone, some of the campgrounds didn't open until late summer because of a staffing situation with COVID. And I guess we really don't know what's going to happen this year with COVID as far as whether parks are going to have their entire seasonal workforce in play. And if not, will some of the campgrounds be closed this year?
Well, last year with COVID, it was really on a park by park basis, dependent on what the local situation was with COVID. And I think this year will end up being the same. They'll just be very locally focused on what the scenario is on the ground in the county and state that each park is located in.
Yeah, so it's really important for travelers to check out a park-specific website to see what's open. And I know last year we tried to keep a daily list of campgrounds and parks that were open, and we'll try and do that again this year.
Yeah.
In general,
ahead.
private parks work very hard to find accommodations for guests that show up that don't have reservations. We try to find another park nearby. And our federal partners are getting better and better at providing that same assistance to people that are looking. So
That's great.
And I think on the public side, the continued and increased use of recreation.gov as a tool to, communicate with visitors and guests when things might be closed, or even for emergencies. If Tuolumne Meadows, for instance, has the project is moving campsites out of the floodplain. And, but if you have campsites that are in a floodplain and they've been reserved through recreation.gov, then you can at least push out that information to guests. It becomes a, communication tool.
Absolutely.
And it's a way we can do things like partnering more, as Al suggested.
And you guys have come out with it looks like you guys are still, you're coming out with this new app too, or you launched it and it's kind of still being developed, which is kind of a neat tool too. So
yeah, you can. I'm not new. It's the National Park Service app. Just search. It's available on Apple or Android for free, and you can search by different activities, including camping.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great.
So
Tim, I have a question. If you're one of our, we're watched by a lot of campground owners out there, right? Who, just like Al, maybe near national parks or impacted by national parks like Dubois, or if they're being traveled through. If I'm a private campground owner and I want to work more closely with my national park that's in my area, how would I go about doing that?
I didn't quite hear the whole question. If somebody could repeat it. Did anybody get the whole thing?
Can you hear me okay now?
yeah.
I think the question was, if you're a private campground owner outside of a national park, how can you work with the park staff?
How do you not work with the park staff, but work with the park to have a better partnership so that you can both benefit?
So every park is going to have a public information officer, and I would suggest starting with contacting that person and expressing the interest in developing a stronger partnership. And again, each park is kind of run by its own staff, and it's going to be individual to each park unit to how you can work together with them. But that's definitely something the Park Service is interested in continuing to do, and we work with a lot of partners across the system.
Okay. Yeah.
Fabulous.
It's almost noon. I know we had at least one person that had to leave for a meeting. I don't know, Brian, did you have to leave or not?
Well, I think a little bit of flexibility, but let's let everybody just kind of. Al, do you have anything closing to share, just so we can let everybody come up if they need to?
good conversation. I get call out Derek Crandall, who probably has been an energy behind modernizing national park campgrounds before anybody else. And I see where he's been participating in this. He should have been here instead of me, but Derek has done wonderful work over a number of years to make this happen.
Yeah,
It'd be awesome to connect with him. Yeah, after this.
Well, if you have to jump, Al, really appreciate you being here on the show. As always, we all know RAC's a leader in the industry. You guys got a lot of different parks, continue to grow, that kind of stuff. And so we definitely appreciate your voice and your thoughts and all that kind of stuff. So.
Yeah. And Tamara, I don't know. Did I pronounce that right this time?
No.
Tamara. It's been great just talking with you. And thanks so much for being willing to come on. And it was great just hearing some of the stuff you've been working on and some of the things that we can look forward to, I guess, down the road. So.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the conversation and the continued partnership with folks like Al and Derek Crandall. And it's great to meet you guys on the call.
Yeah, you too.
Look forward to continuing the conversation in the future.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tamara.
Yeah, thanks.
So guys, jump off if you need to, but then Kurt,
All right.
tell us just a little bit more. Kurt, tell us about what National Park Traveler covers too, because obviously it's national parks, but what are some of the things that you really want people to come to your website to learn about?
National Parks Traveler is kind of a hybrid between a daily newspaper and a magazine. And so we'll have a lot of news-related items, whether a campground is open or closed, whether there's a search and rescue mission in a national park, what is Congress doing in terms of funding the national parks or managing them. And at the same time, we do longer features, whether it's probing an issue, like a story we put up yesterday that is just being slammed with comments is what should the National Park Service do with Confederate monuments and statues in the national battlefields?
I can't see how that would be controversial.
No, not at all. A couple of weeks ago, we looked at the RV industry and how it's really seen a lot of business due to COVID. We'll have a feature coming up on the 30 by 30 initiative and what are private companies in the outdoor industry doing to help support that. We can't compete on a daily basis with the national media like the Washington Post or the LA Times or New York Times, because you're looking at the staff. Eventually or occasionally we break national stories, but what we're really trying to do is, in addition to providing a service, such as last year telling people which parks were open during COVID or which parks were closed, we're trying to look at the overlooked stories, or the stories that are ignored for some reason by the national media.
Yeah. And I think, you guys do a wonderful job. I mean, it's just, I haven't been able to read The Future of Confederate Monuments yet, but I looked it up real quick, and it definitely looks like an interesting story. And I mean, you guys are definitely, you guys definitely dive into some topics that are extremely interesting. I like the history stuff that you guys do too. So they do some stuff on like the historical parts of some of the parks. You do some opinion pieces too, and you obviously have the podcast. So you're just working in a bunch of different areas. You're a nonprofit, correct? So
we are. So give and give often.
So, and you guys have partnerships with some of the some of the support from like the Blue Ridge Parkway Foundation and Yosemite Conservancy. So you have some support from some of the larger groups in the national park that support national parks. So that's great too. So
yeah, and we're hoping to build on that with support from the industry, because without adequate funding, the travel is not going to last forever. And we're read by over 3 million readers and listeners a year. And so we've definitely found a niche that people really like. And with the movement to Canada, with more coverage of Parks Canada, we're seeing increased readership up there. So it's a really popular website.
Yeah. So, and you guys redesigned it this year too, or the end of last year? So,
yeah, the end of last year.
Yeah. So, okay.
All right. Well, I don't have anything else. Do you have anything else, Ben?
No, I see Cara ditched us.
Well, she might have lost the internet connection. Don't judge her.
So, no, I think it's been a really great conversation. And thanks, Al and Kurt, for coming on and being willing to take part, and Tamara for coming on. And so.
Well, thanks for the invite. It's been fun.
Yeah, so we'll definitely keep you guys in mind, and hopefully we can work with both of you on different things down the road. So.
Sounds good.
All right.
So,
take care, guys. Have a great day. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Yep. Bye.